Hello and welcome to the F1 Strategy Report, powered by Apex Race Manager, the mobile race management simulator. My name's Michael Lamonato and this is round 14, the Italian Grand Prix. After Sebastian Vettel cruised to victory in Belgium, Ferrari was expected to break an 8-year home race victory drought in Monza, but it wasn't to be. A first-lap crash with Lewis Hamilton put Vettel out of podium contention, and Mercedes used its 2-cars-to-1 advantage to overpower Kimi Raikkonen and take a classic victory. So does Vettel shoulder all of the blame for Ferrari's waning title fortunes? To help answer that question, I'm joined by Luca Manacorda from FormulaPassion.it. Luca, how you doing?
Ciao Michael, hi everybody. I'm back from Monza. I'm good, thanks. And we have a lot to talk about.
Oh, there's plenty to talk about from this race, but let's take it right back to the start of the weekend. This is, of course, a back-to-back race with Belgium last week, which Sebastian Vettel won pretty comfortably in the end of the day. There was a good performance by Ferrari at Spa-Francorchamps, and it felt like there was a lot of momentum behind Ferrari going into their home race. They hadn't won since 2010, I beg your pardon, in 8 years. What was the feeling like going to Monza? What was the crowd's expectations like ahead of this Grand Prix?
There was a lot of hope for this weekend because Tifosi but also Ferrari were a little bit sure that this was finally the season for a new victory in Monza and maybe a victory that launched Ferrari into the world champion. So if you see in the show in Milan, there was a lot of Tifosi and a lot of hope for this race, but the weekend has gone in another way, we can say.
Yeah, definitely in a different direction. The fans, obviously, the Tifosi at Monza is almost the most notable part. It's obviously a classic circuit. We've been racing there for just about as long as any other racetrack on the Formula One calendar. But if you're a Ferrari driver, or if you're Ferrari, if you're Sebastian Vettel or the team involved in running his car, do you feel like that? How much pressure does it add for them to be performing at their home race? Like we said, they haven't won in almost a decade, and it's been a bit of a difficult track for them, certainly in recent years, because of the power unit that Mercedes had. But how much is the huge crowd that they got there this weekend making that job really difficult for them?
Yeah, it's probably so, because especially for a driver like Vettel, because Raikkonen is Iceman and it's not a problem for him where the Formula One race, but for Vettel it seems to be different. And of course there's a lot of pressure on Ferrari drivers for this race, from fans, from media, from Ferrari itself. So it's not so simple. Sometimes this pressure is not a good element for the Italian weekend.
And obviously we'll get to the main parts of this race shortly, and of course the crash on lap 1. But I do want to ask you a little bit about how the media did respond to this race in Italy, because there was so much pressure for Ferrari to finally get the job done at home. And not only did they not do it, but Sebastian Vettel has slipped pretty far behind Lewis Hamilton in the championship standings now. It's 30 points, which is the biggest it's been all year. What was the response? Because, I mean, you and I were talking a little bit beforehand, and it does feel like, I mean, the weak component so far in Sebastian Vettel's campaign has been Sebastian Vettel himself.
Yeah. This morning on the Italian newspaper, we can read a lot of criticism to Vettel, and we can say that a lot of journalists disapprove his race, not only in this Grand Prix, because Sebastian Vettel has done a lot of mistakes during this year and the last season. Now there's a huge part of the journalists that think that with Fernando Alonso this season and maybe the last season could have a different story. It's not a good moment for Sebastian now in Italy.
And I mean, this is sort of the question from the weekend, right? And yeah, we will get to the crash in a moment, but Sebastian Vettel came to Ferrari with obviously a big reputation, a 4-time world champion, wants to become a 5-time world champion this year, hopefully. Maybe he still can, we don't know. But Why do you feel like there's so many errors in Sebastian Vettel's driving? It didn't really feel like it was happening very often at Red Bull Racing, but now when he's in a straight fight with Lewis Hamilton, we're really seeing a lot of mistakes from Vettel. I mean, what do you think is behind this otherwise very cool and collected driver?
President Sergio Marchionne said last year that Vettel is Deutsch, but is a little bit too Italian. So he's he's too emotional, and in this race, it seems this is true. Sebastian is too emotional sometimes, and we have seen this year when Hamilton is better in some times. For example, we have seen in German, we have seen in French, we have seen in Baku. These are mistakes that we cannot expect from a four-time world champion.
And it will be interesting to see if he can close out the championship this year, if he can continue maybe next year. But yeah, I do feel like we're getting to a point where we're asking some maybe difficult questions of Sebastian Vettel in his championship campaign. But let's get on to one of those moments from this weekend, because we want to talk about how expectation for Ferrari unraveled and became disappointment by the end of Sunday. In many respects, it started in qualifying, even though Ferrari got that 1-2, the first time since 2000 that Ferrari locked out the front row. Already, Sebastian Vettel was a little bit unhappy. We heard after the race the engineers on the team radio celebrating excitedly that they'd scored the front row lockout, and Sebastian Vettel's only response was, "We'll talk later." He was not happy about not being able to get the slipstream behind Lewis Hamilton as the way they'd planned, but I mean, were you surprised that Kimi Räikkönen didn't give Sebastian Vettel a slipstream, given how far he is behind in the championship? Surely Ferrari would want to be favouring Vettel at this point of the year.
Yeah, this is strange, but we have to say that Vettel was just behind Hamilton, so his position during the last lap was not so bad. Yeah, in that case, the team radio of Sebastian sounds like a team radio of Alonso in the past. I don't know if you remember the famous Scemi or Geni, that in Italian means Dumbo or a genius. Maybe in 2012, only for the slipstream with in that case with Massa. It's not a new thing for Ferrari Monza, this problem with the slipstream, but it's the first time that we saw Sebastian Vettel so angry with the team.
Especially given that it was a 1-2 result, and you'd think that, well, the worst he could do on Sunday is to finish second. Maybe he'd even have a shot at the win. But, I mean, it was a 1-2 result, which is what people sort of expected going into the weekend, because Ferrari did so well in Belgium, which is a similar circuit. They both need a lot of power, and Ferrari seems to have the fastest power unit. But Lewis Hamilton was quite close, even in qualifying, and we know he was very close during the race. Was it maybe catching Ferrari a little bit by surprise that they didn't have it all their own way, that Mercedes was maybe closer than they expected this weekend?
Yeah, I think that we have to say that was Hamilton maybe closer to Ferrari, because we have seen the difference between Lewis and Bottas. So I think that in this case we have to say that we have seen the value of the driver of Lewis Hamilton. There's a lot of Lewis Hamilton in this result.
Yeah, and if we talk about this being a straight fight between Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel, I think that's definitely something that we'll get onto momentarily, because this is potentially one of those season-defining races. And I mean, so we say the Ferrari had a 1-2 on the front row of the grid. It should have been fairly straightforward from there, even if Mercedes was faster than they expected, because you have two cars versus two cars, they get a clean getaway. It should have been fairly straightforward, and they had a clean getaway for about 4 corners. That's all they got, though, and Sebastian Vettel came under attack from Lewis Hamilton and hit him in turn 4 into the second chicane, spun his car around the wrong way, ended up pretty much the back of the grid. Here, I mean, of course, drivers never think they're at fault, but Sebastian Vettel was fairly adamant that Lewis Hamilton left him no room. I think Hamilton said before the race that he wanted to try some go-karting moves to try and get ahead. And I feel like that was a pretty good one.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It has worked very good for him. I agree with the decision of the race direction. There was no guilty driver for what happened in the turn, so it's just a mistake of Vettel and a great move from Hamilton. That's all.
Do you think it's fair to say, and this is going to be one of those questions we're probably going to be asking for the whole year, but is this as an example of Sebastian Vettel cracking under the pressure? It sort of reminded me a little bit in Singapore last year, where he felt like he was losing the lead at the first turn and defended a little bit too aggressively and ended up crashing out of the race. Here, was it the same thing? He felt like, even though he probably had the faster car, he was losing second place to Lewis Hamilton, felt like he had to defend quite harder and got it wrong again.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you because Sebastian has the fastest car on the grid. We have seen this in the last 2 weekends. So he has not to be so aggressive in the first lap. If another driver, could be Verstappen in Singapore or Hamilton in Monza, passed him, he has to remain cool and concentrated, not try to resist and take this risk so early in the race, because he has a fastest car and there is a DRS, so he can come back in his position. So it's a bad mistake.
And certainly this was not only a costly mistake for Sebastian Vettel in terms of his race. Obviously he lost a lot of points to Lewis Hamilton. Obviously he recovered up to 4th place, which is not a bad result, I guess. I mean, that it helps to have such a fast car. But more importantly, it gave Kimi Raikkonen a strategic disadvantage, because all of a sudden Mercedes had 2 cars to race and Ferrari had only Kimi Raikkonen all on his own. But he did maintain the lead of the race, even though there was a bit of a fight after the safety car on the first lap when it resumed on lap 4. And all of a sudden it became this really difficult race for Ferrari, because they had to decide how to defend against, obviously, Lewis Hamilton, how to counteract Valtteri Bottas, and they did so by pitting first. They got into the pit stops in lap 21, end of lap 20 for lap 21 to move to the new soft tyres. And we saw, and it became a small bit of controversy, didn't it? Because Mercedes sent its mechanics out to the pit lane because they thought maybe they would also pit Lewis Hamilton, change their mind at the last moment. And that was a decisive factor for them as well, giving Lewis Hamilton another 7 laps to have fresher tyres towards the end.
Yeah. That was another key moment for the race, because Mercedes, it's like a chess game, and they won this game because Ferrari was afraid of the undercut, but they pitted too early, and we have seen this at the end of the race with Kimi that struggled with his tires. The tires were destroyed at the end of the race. So Mercedes won this race on track, but also on the box with the strategy. And of course, a key role was the role of Valtteri Bottas, that somebody here has criticized a lot. But in this case, it's right for Mercedes use a driver in that way. Maybe it's not totally fair, but we can understand them, I think. And it's a way to recognize the power of Ferrari in this season, I think.
I thought it was interesting as well because, as you say, they used Valtteri Bottas to block Kimi Raikkonen's progress, essentially, to help Lewis Hamilton catch up after he made his own pit stop, because he'd fallen further behind. Raikkonen was fairly quick on those new soft tyres. But it is kind of ironic, and I think Nico Rosberg said this afterwards on Sky Sports F1, that it's ironic that Mercedes used team orders to beat Ferrari on a weekend that Ferrari didn't use any team orders at all. We know maybe they might have in the race, we don't know, but not in qualifying. They didn't seem to be preparing to let Sebastian Vettel win the race and get past Kimi Raikkonen. So, you know, of all the teams to be beaten by team orders, you wouldn't have thought it would be Ferrari.
Yeah, it's strange because we saw in the past that Ferrari used his driver to help each other. For example, remember in 2012 when Massa in Austin were penalized to help Alonso to start in a better position, or of course sometimes Barrichello with Schumacher in the early 2000s. So yeah, it's ironic that now it's Mercedes to use this kind of strategy. Maybe it's also something, it's about the role of the driver in the team. So because in Ferrari we know that they're thinking about the lineup of the next season, and just in Monza emerged this scenario that with Leclerc that will replace Raikkonen next year. Also the start of Kimi, the first turn one in the race, maybe it doesn't help Vettel because he knows that next year he won't be in Ferrari. This could be a way to read this situation.
And it makes for an interesting background of this race, the Charles Leclerc news as well, if indeed that is what's happening. But it sounds like he's destined to replace Kimi Raikkonen in 2019. Raikkonen, to get back into the middle of this race, was stuck behind Valtteri Bottas, but it sort of was in equal parts a whole bunch of different reasons that he ran out of tyres towards the end of this race. It was partly because he was stuck behind Valtteri, of course, but then he was getting Valtteri's slipstream, so that helped him. But it was partly as well that he was pushing so hard on those new tyres at the very start of his stint, when he still had a lot of fuel in the car, when there was still a lot of rubber on the tyres, which meant they blistered more easily. Was this also just a little bit of bad management from Kimi Raikkonen in terms of playing the longer game and knowing that Lewis Hamilton was going to have fresher tyres at the end, but not really conserving his own tyres?
For sure, I agree. And I think another problem for him was that he cannot overtake Bottas. And this is not good for his race because with fresh tyres and a faster car, he should pass Bottas. With the use of DRS, we saw that was not impossible. So these laps has been a very important moment of the race and for the final result.
It's important to say as well, Valtteri Bottas was held out there until lap 36, which is when he pitted, and Kimi Raikkonen regained the lead, albeit only for about 8 laps, I think it was, thereabouts, before Lewis Hamilton was able to pass him. But this didn't completely throw Valtteri Bottas under the bus, because he was still competing with Max Verstappen for third place, and even though it did mean he fell further behind Verstappen when he emerged from the pits, he had a significant tyre advantage over him because he had much newer soft tyres, obviously. Verstappen had pitted almost or about 10 laps before he had. And we saw that Bottas did close right up to Max Verstappen, tried to pass him, but Verstappen back to being quite aggressive in defence, just wouldn't let him by.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the race, Mercedes has reached the best results, even if they keep Bottas on track for so many laps. We saw in the battle between Valtteri and Verstappen that Verstappen, is aggressive driver, but he's also a great driver in the battle, because with a slower car, especially in the straight, Bottas can overtake him. So we also have seen decided that best drivers in the battle were not in Ferrari, so we can say even if with his aggressive defense at the end, Verstappen make a pleasure to Vettel, because Vettel has gained a position due to the penalty.
And we saw Sebastian Vettel, he did get up to 4th place, as you say, partly because of the Max Verstappen penalty. He never even had to try and pass Max Verstappen. He just had to finish within 5 seconds of him and moved himself up to 4th. So a strong recovery drive, as we said. But how do we feel like Ferrari goes forward from here? We saw Mercedes is obviously not afraid to use Valtteri Bottas as the number 2 driver. Toto Wolff said that they'd make the decision after Monza to make him formally the number 2 driver, not just on a race-by-race basis. And, I mean, they already are, so I see no reason why they wouldn't in the next couple of races. Does Sebastian Vettel now have to demand that he becomes the number 1 driver of this team? And will Kimi Raikkonen accept that if, like you say, this ends up being his last year at Ferrari and he's about to be replaced?
Yeah, it's a mystery because even on Saturday we felt that there will be something not so clear on the race because in Ferrari the situation is not so clear. So we can know what we will see in the next races. Raikkonen has been a very fair driver for his team during this season. So I think that he will help battle in the battle for the title, but we cannot underestimate the situation of the drivers and the discussion for the 2019 lineup. It will be interesting.
I thought it was interesting as well, Maurizio Rivabene's reaction to Mercedes using team orders. And we've already said it's unusual that Mercedes beat Ferrari with team orders when normally you'd think it would be the other way around. But he responded in a way that made it sound as though Ferrari doesn't use team orders. Is this possibly the start of a fairer Ferrari in the sense where they don't choose a number one driver? Or are they getting ready? As we talked about earlier, if Charles Leclerc is coming next year, are they getting ready to not have Sebastian Vettel as the number one driver? Are they trying to prepare him for a world where maybe he's up against a teammate who's just as fast as he is?
I think that if Ferrari will lose the title this year, we will see something different in the next season, especially if Leclerc will arrive in Ferrari. And we have to remember that Rivabene is a great fan of Raikkonen, so maybe he's trying to pushing his driver because he wants him again next year, and that's why he said this about the Mercedes strategy. A very complicated situation, I think. And in Monza we have a meeting. The journalists have a meeting with the new Ferrari AD, Luca Manacorda. And he seems just a man that is going in Ferrari, but with a soft move, following the Marchionne way. I have this idea of him.
If we wrap up a couple of other stories from this weekend, I thought one of the outstanding drives of the weekend was Sergio Perez, who came from 14th to finish 8th on the road. He finished 7th because Romain Grosjean got disqualified, but let's say 8th on the road for now. A big drive from him in a car that was a little bit damaged as well, and for a team that is still under a big legal cloud over the administration of the off-season, of the mid-season break, rather.
Yeah, I'm a great fan of Perez. I think he's a very solid driver, and we have seen this in the last two races. Somebody said that he has a chance to come back in McLaren, but today we saw that this will be not possible, and I think it's also better for him because McLaren has a long way to come back on the position. So yeah, another great race for Perez, and I think that he will stay in Force India to help Lance Stroll, that he will be the new driver for obviously reasons.
Yeah. It was, the midfield has been really interesting all year, and it was again in this race. Sergio Perez going from 14th to 8th, you would think that Force India pulled off some terrific strategy to get him there, but really, they didn't. They did exactly the same thing they did with Esteban Ocon. And just to emphasize how well Perez did to make up those places, because he made up all of them, he was only 3 seconds behind Ocon before their pit stop. So he'd already caught up to Esteban Ocon in the meanwhile. And the reason Ocon and Perez could finish so high, they passed Carlos Sainz, for example, and Carlos Sainz qualified 7th and finished 9th on the road anyway, was just simply because we saw how big a power deficit Renault has. There was nothing Carlos Sainz could do to defend against either Force India driver. Carlos Sainz was never going to even be able to overtake Romain Grosjean, who I think Haas had the 4th fastest car this weekend, even though it was illegal, it turns out, which is another story altogether. But it really showed, I thought, the power differences in the midfield, and that was what made the entire difference for this race.
Yeah, of course, Monza is a track where the power unit is so important. So we have seen that there is still a big difference between Ferrari and Mercedes power unit and Renault power unit. I think we also seen that Honda power unit is not so bad. said, is going better and better, so this could be good news for Red Bull.
That will be one of the really interesting parts of 2019 will be how that Honda power unit goes. Finally, I think it is worth touching on Haas and Romain Grosjean, because Grosjean's been having a bit of a renaissance in the second half of this year and late last season. Late before the mid-season break, I should say. After he had a very difficult start to the season compared to Kevin Magnussen, his teammate. He's turned it around. He's looking sharper. He's looking a bit punchier. Maybe Haas will retain him. Who knows? It's difficult to say, obviously. They're not saying anything yet. But, of course, the team was disqualified from Monza. I can't even remember the last time we had a technical disqualification. That's got to hurt Haas, considering that they're in this battle with Renault for fourth place. In fact, they'd equalled fourth place had they scored the points that Romain Grosjean had scored. I believe they are appealing that result, but that's a pretty big blow against that team. And also, it shows how personal it's getting between Haas and Renault in that fight for the Constructors' Championship fourth place.
Yeah, this year has thrown away a lot of points because it's clear that they have the third car on the grid. Also because they use the Ferrari power unit, that it's probably the best power unit this year, especially after the Spec 2 of the engine. So they can lose this the fourth position at the end of the year due to their mistakes. But I think that we have also to remember that this is a very young team. This is the first season of this team, so sometimes I can understand their mistakes, I have to say. After
all, they're only a couple of years old. Even if they're getting these really competitive parts from Ferrari, they still need to learn how to use them, after all. They are still a very new team. So the fact that they're still competing for fourth in the championship is pretty impressive, I think. And you wonder whether or not they can go even further next year. It will be really interesting, the rise of the Haas Formula One team. That was the Italian Grand Prix. But I want to end this one with one more question. And I think this is going to be a question I'm going to ask just about every week from now on in, because we're into the final part of the season. We're going to Asia next. Of course, the Singapore Grand Prix is next. And we all remember what happened in Singapore last year. And we all remember what happened to Ferrari and Vettel's championship chances this time last year in Singapore and in Malaysia and in Japan is where it really all went wrong. So after the Italian Grand Prix, looking ahead to the next couple of races, do you think Ferrari still has a chance? Does Sebastian Vettel still have a chance this season to claim the championship?
Yeah, I think that it's still possible for Ferrari to win this world champion because, for a simple reason, because the car is the better on the grid. So if the driver, we can say that now Ferrari has the best car. But Mercedes still has the best driver and the best team. So it will be a great battle, I think. I think that Ferrari could do this, react to this situation. In Singapore, it's possible to do a 1-2 result. And maybe in Singapore, they could receive an help from Red Bull. It's one of the tracks where Red Bull could act a role in the championship battle. And so, let's see, I think that it will be an interesting final part of the season.
And hopefully, yes, a great battle, because we've had a pretty great battle so far this year, and it would be a shame if it didn't make it all the way to Abu Dhabi. But we'll wait and see. This is Formula One. You never know what's going to happen. It was a really interesting, a really thrilling Italian Grand Prix, even if the Tifosi didn't get the result they wanted. But it's been really great to talk to you again this year, Luca.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It's been a very emotional weekend, and I'm still proved by this.
That was Luca Manacorda from FormulaPassion.it. The Strategy Report is a Beer Mogul podcast powered by Apex Race Manager, the mobile race management simulator. You can get every episode by subscribing on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you normally get your podcasts. And don't forget to leave a review to help other F1 fans find the show. You can also read the written report at f1strategyreport.com and stay up to date by finding us on Facebook and on Twitter. My name's Michael Lamonato. You can find me at Michael Lamonato on Twitter, and I'll catch you in 2 weeks' time for a wrap-up of the Singapore Grand Prix.